Hello, I'm Barbara Sills Nevergold, co-founder of the Uncrowned Queens Institute. Welcome to They've Got Stories to Tell, conversations with uncrowned community builders. This program brings you the inspiring and sometimes little-known stories of the women and men who have made or are making a difference in our community through their contributions and accomplishments in the arts, business, healthcare, education, politics, media, advocacy, and so much more. Each week, we have the pleasure of talking to another person of accomplishment and contribution. Accomplishment because of all they've done in thought, word, and deed, and contribution because of all they've given back to the community. An uncrowned community builder because we have not properly recognized, celebrated, and commended these individuals for a life that exemplifies the unspoken gifts they represent. Now, if you've heard anything about the activities to preserve and promote the historic Michigan Street corridor or the plans to restore historic Humboldt Parkway to its former botanical splendor, then you've heard the name of today's guest. And if you haven't heard about either of these important community projects, then stay tuned, because today we're going to talk about each one with a woman who is knowledgeable about these significant Buffalo projects. Karen Stanley Fleming has been a committed champion in the fight for resources to preserve and provide access to the cultural and historical assets in these two vital districts of our city. And it's such a pleasure to welcome her to They've Got Stories to Tell for this conversation. Hi, Karen.
Hello, Barbara.
Oh, this is not the first time
Certainly
that we've met on the set of
Correct.
An Uncrowned Queens production. I think the last time was probably now about 5 years ago, and we were talking about another passion of yours. So just tell us, so that we don't keep the audience in suspense. What we talked about at that point.
5 years ago was 2013. That was the centennial year for our beloved, not our, because you're in a different one, for the sorority of which I am a member, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Right.
Of course, that's a national sorority with about 1,000 chapters around the country, and our own chapter here in Buffalo. Buffalo Alumni Chapter took full part in that centennial celebration, including turning Niagara Falls red. And that was probably the pinnacle. That was probably the pinnacle of our version of the centennial. And it made the inside cover, it made the, the centerfold of the National Delta Journal. There we were, the Buffalo Alumni Chapter with Niagara Falls in red behind us.
Red, fantastic. I'd forgotten about that. But that's one of the things, like so many of the women and the men who've been guests on this show, that people have learned, about the African American women and men, the uncrowned community builders, is that you do so many things.
Oh, well,
you're
keep
not
up
constricted.
now, keep up.
Not constricted to one thing. But
Right.
today's show,
Okay.
we talked about history, and we talked about before the show about how you got interested, actually, in history through the family and through your family. So tell me a little bit about your family history and
Wow.
what
How long do you
inspired
have? Well, my father is Thornton Stanley. My mother is Mary Bates Stanley. I knew both of my grandmothers. I knew two of my great-grandmothers. And our family takes history very seriously. In family reunions, we read what different family members have researched on the family history. So, for example, on my father's side, some of my cousins have researched back to the fact that the Stanleys landed in North Carolina as enslaved people from Africa. And we know they were marched down to Alabama, our own Black Trail of Tears, where they were brought to, make economic advancement for the slave owners and the plantation owners, mainly by picking cotton.
Right.
And even after slavery, some people don't realize this was quite an enterprise, even in my mother's day. And she might not, but she doesn't mind. She was born in 1936, so slavery was well over.
Right.
But that was the means by which partly she earned money for her college education. And she was proud of the fact that she could pick over 200 pounds of cotton a day
Goodness.
and her cousins. And I said, Mama, why would you want to do that? You're going up and down and in the hot sun. And in today's vernacular, at least in my business school training, we would call it visualization. She said, I was picking that cotton and I was thinking about that dress I wanted in that Sears Roebuck catalog, and I just keep on picking.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
it's so important that we share those kinds of stories, certainly with young people, because too often, even now, people don't believe that we don't believe as a people, African Americans, that we can trace our history back
Sure.
beyond slavery and even into slavery. So having those kinds of experiences and writing them down
Yes.
and passing them on from generation to generation is
And
vital.
now it's not without pain, because, you know, many people know of, is it Goree Island and the Door of
Yes.
No Return? But, you know, we have our own set of atrocities that occurred here in America. And so one on my father's side story that is commonly passed down is that this would have been something like my great-great-grandmother, who was born a slave, was made as a little girl just for the sport of the white people to stand on one leg all day. And to just serve the white woman the water and all. But she had to, if you put that leg down, she'd get a beating.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Those anecdotes they are heart-wrenching, but they also, you know, deliver the reality of what our people endured,
It
and
does.
yet we still
Well, see,
survive.
that's what I try to look at, but it is still painful and it does make me mad. But I try to focus on the resilient factor, the resilience factor. And so I say, you know, if my ancestors could do that, well, why can't I do this or that difficult thing that is in front of me? So that was on my dad's side, which was the king's side. So my father, the Stanleys, had, and it was well known across town, white members of their family, and they knew who their white cousins were, and they all favored in the face. So it really wasn't a lot of
Well,
denying
you can't hide the genes, right? Sometimes.
until it came time to divide the riches at the funeral. And don't think that any of the black kings got the land or the money. That didn't happen. So
But, yeah.
interesting stories. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you've translated that, you know, that passion, that love, that knowledge about the importance of history to what you've done over a number of years in Buffalo. And we're going to talk about your activities with the Michigan Street Corridor, that historic corridor.
Yes.
And too often we think of it as, I think you called it what? The
I say it's a corner. It's not a corner, it's a corridor.
Right.
It actually spans, and we marked so much by the churches in our community. So the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor begins at First Shiloh Baptist Church, and there
On
is
Pine
a marker at Pine Street. There is a marker at 15 Pine Street honoring William Wells Brown, whom you would know is a famed abolitionist, was a famed abolitionist.
And author.
One of the earliest black men in America to be published with his writings. And the slave narratives, I've been to the Grosvenor Room at the Erie County Library just so that I could learn more about him. And because most of these books, you know, you can't just, some of them
I
you
know
cannot
can't take
just order
out,
them
take
off
them
of
out.
Amazon,
Well,
and you can't take
you know
them out
what?
of the library.
We're going to have to pause right here a minute because
okay.
already we need
Already?
to take a break.
Wow.
But when we come back, we're going to talk with Karen more about the Michigan Street Heritage Corridor and what it all's about and what it's all about. Stay tuned, please.
Great.
Movement. Along with weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to Fight Arthritis.
Hello, I'm Barbara Sills Nevergold, and this is They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders. And today the conversation is with Karen Stanley Fleming. I almost flipped your name around, Karen. And we were talking about the Michigan Corridor and the breadth of the Heritage Corridor. So tell us more about what we're talking about, you know, geographically.
Absolutely. Because, you know, it spans not only geographies, but also time periods. But first we'll talk geography. And this is a construct that came about as we had to articulate our vision to create a statewide heritage area. So we were going after a particular designation. We were part of the process is that you choose the geography. So I want everybody to understand this is not something that's on the map, or it's not a river that starts here, ends there. It's something that you have to do to earn a designation. So through community meetings and research by experts, we decided that the footprint would be from Pine Street and First Shiloh Baptist Church, and then it takes a jog over to Michigan itself, because at Michigan and Clinton, there you find the AME Church. So not St. Luke, but it was originally St. Luke congregation, but it's now Durham Memorial AME Zion. Then there you turn and go north on Michigan, and you pass by Michigan and Broadway. Those are the properties that most people are familiar with. The Michigan Street Baptist Church, the Nash House, the home of the Reverend E. Jesse Nash, and the Colored Musicians Club at 145 Broadway. And the newest member is radio station WUFO at 143 Broadway.
And let me just say, because because they're no longer there, but they were significant assets at the time.
Oh, yes.
It was Little Harlem.
Little
Club.
Harlem.
And then, of course, as you go up the street, the Michigan YMCA.
Very critical in the history, in the telling of the history. And we know that the Michigan Y was designed by none other than John Brent, the city's first African-American architect. But many people did not know that John Brent also designed the Jesse Clipper Park, which is at William in Michigan. And now we do adopt and speak of the Jesse Clipper Square as an important part, and it is an important part of history. Now, you probably know, but I'll share with your listeners that Jesse Clipper was the first African American to perish in World War I who was from the Western New York area. Now, he was not just any old, I think people just were very busy back then, because, you know, we spoke of John Brent. He was not only an excellent architect, he was the first president of the Buffalo branch of the NAACP. So
again,
now here's his double duty. Now, but we were talking about Jesse Clipper and the fact that John Brent designed the Michigan Avenue Y, he designed the Jesse Clipper Square, and the reason that Jesse Clipper is due honor is not only did he die in the World War I and never came back to America, he's buried in France. And but Jesse Clipper was one of the members of the Colored Musicians Club. So here he is.
As well.
He was an officer. So he's a soldier, he's a musician, you know, he's a warrior, he's a courageous man. And so Jesse Clipper Square is there on Michigan Avenue.
And just to say a quick thing about John Brent is, of course, he also designed some gates.
Yes,
at
the
zoo.
Grand Entrance Court. You know, and I just want to try to get that distinction, because there's so much more than gates. Gates sounds like it could be, you know, a fence, like a chain link fence, but at the time that was the grand entrance to the zoo. And this was the time when most people didn't have cars, and they got to the zoo either by walking or by trolley. And that was the main stop, and it was the grand entrance. You would get off the trolley and you see in front of you these great stone pillars, and then the wrought iron gates around it. And so we've kind of dumbed that down, and we said he designed the gates at the zoo, but it was the grand entrance court, and it's now on the National Register.
Well, this is why we're talking to you today.
Okay.
Because, you know, that kind of detail regarding the history, and certainly regarding the corridor. And, you know, so we're going to keep moving along up Michigan Avenue,
much to tell.
Because
north
before we run out of time.
Yeah. So going north, you're also going to pass Pilgrim Baptist Church. You're going to go through the medical corridor. And one of the exciting projects this year for Michigan Street is we're going to unveil some street post banners that will honor African Americans in the medical profession, so that as you pass on Michigan Street and you're thinking about, and you should be thinking about Children's Hospital and you know, Buffalo General, but you will also realize that African Americans have made a contribution to medicine, and particularly ones who are from here in Western New York. So going on north, you go on up to Bethel AME Church, which was like Michigan Street Baptist Church, one of the first African American. In fact, it was the first African American congregation. Of course, they weren't there at Michigan and Ferry at that time. They were on Vine Street, and it was Vine Street AME Church. So at any rate, very historic institution. And now the new attraction, the Freedom Wall.
Yes,
everybody
absolutely.
loves the Freedom Wall.
And so many of the individuals depicted on the wall, of
Yes.
course, come back and relate and are associated with the history
Yes.
that you've just recounted to us. So we
Local
have to
and
get that.
local and national heroes
Absolutely.
and sheroes on that
Absolutely.
wall.
Now, what's the vision for the future of the corridor? We've got about 2 or 3 more minutes before we take a break and come back. But what's the vision?
Well, the short answer is go to michiganstreetbuffalo.org because our vision statement, our mission statement, the management plan, which is more or less a strategic planning document, shows that it's a vision for decades. You will never get this done in a year or in 2 years. And that's why it sort of often pains me when people compare Michigan Street to Canal Side. I mean, how long did it take Canal Side to get past the Bash Pro idea? I mean, they fumbled around in the wilderness 10 and 20 years before they came up with, let's put the lawn chairs on the side of the river, you know, and now they've got Explore and more museum and all types of wonderful things. The point is that history and the interpretation of history, the reuse of historic buildings, the revitalization of a neighborhood, it takes time. And Michigan Street is like every other historic interpretation project and process. It is a process.
And I know from my own research in early Black Buffalo history, is that we have an extraordinarily rich history.
Oh, yes.
And so we still have a lot of research yet
Oh,
to
my
do
goodness. Yes,
before
yes,
we
yes.
uncover the significant history associated with
I'm
our
so
community.
glad you mentioned that because it is actually a part of our vision statement. You know, so what is the corridor? It's a destination, yes. It's a potential tourist attraction, yes. But it's a neighborhood. It's a place where not only African Americans, but Chinese, Polish, prior to the 40s, it was a very integrated neighborhood, as a matter of fact. And eventually, it evolved into a primarily African American neighborhood. But why do I say that? Because you asked, what is the vision and what is the plan? And there are so many spokes of the plan that it would be so hard to encapsulate them in 2 to 3 minutes. So it's a very large plan. It's actually a multi-decade plan. There is no we do not have the untrue notion that the commission would implement all of this. It is private, public partnerships, philanthropic, grassroots. It's all of the above.
And all of that takes resources.
All of the above.
And all that takes resources.
Yes.
So, you know, this conversation is moving along very quickly.
Yes.
And we have to take another break.
But do go to michiganstreetbuffalo.org because you can learn so much
well, we
more.
will put that up, and we ask you to stay tuned. We'll be back right after these messages.
Great.
Save a place for me. Save a space for me. In your heart. In your heart.
Every year, the United Negro College Fund helps thousands of students go to college. But for everyone we help, there's one we can't. Please support the United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Hello, I'm Barbara Sills Nevergold, and this is They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders. If you've just joining us, you've missed really part of a very important conversation that I'm having with my guest today, Karen Stanley Fleming. We've been talking about the Michigan Street Corridor, Heritage Corridor, and your activities, your involvement with that. But you're also involved with another significant cultural, community, architectural project. The initials ROC stand for?
Restore Our Community Coalition. I like to think that one led into the other, Dr. Nevergold, because when I was in the mayor's office from 2007 to 2010, it was at that time that Mayor Brown appointed me to be on the Michigan Street Commission, which was also a gubernatorial appointment by then Governor David Patterson. So all of that was happening in about 2007 and 2008. And I was doing a lot of grant work in the mayor's office. So he wanted to make sure that there was a person on the commission who could assist the commission in garnering resources, and that's how that started. So then, you know, as they say, your brand, and so my reputation began as one who could gain resources. But do you know, it actually goes back to being able to tell a story, because you can submit a grant budget, but if you don't have a good needs statement, a needs assessment, if you don't tell a story of how this funding will be used to make an impact, then you are not going to win that grant.
You're absolutely
So
right.
thanks goes back to my mother, the English professor. You asked about my history, so I'll put another plug for the family and for HBCUs. Both of my parents are graduates of Alabama A&M University in Huntsville, Alabama, which I have great love for that school because we had so many family outings to the football games, to the basketball games, to the step shows, to the Delta Sigma Theta step shows at Alabama A&M. But at any rate,
that's another
I
history
credit,
in and of itself, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I'll come back. I credit certainly my mom's love for the English language, love for reading, love for writing, her very, much insistence in not sparing with the red ink on us in junior high and high school, so that we were well equipped throughout college and then throughout life to write whatever it would be, if it's the essay for a school project or if it's the grant. So here I was at Michigan Street, and then it came time for me to move on from the city, because I'm not so much a government type of employee. I'm also a very entrepreneurial spirited person. People say, Karen, what you do? I've started calling myself a social entrepreneur. I didn't make that up. I read that in the Harvard Business Review. It's a term that was coined by business-minded people about businesses who have to function as a business. They may or may not be not-for-profit, but it is just as important a priority for them to make a social impact. So certainly.
That's interesting, and it's another way, I guess, again, to you say brand yourself, and that's a unique brand.
Thank you.
And that, but
yep, but I didn't make it up. So,
yeah.
But entrepreneurship comes, very easily to me. I am the granddaughter of a business owner. My grandfather, Reverend O.C. Stanley, has a historic marker in Town Creek, Alabama, to his credit, because he not only pastored 2 or 3 churches, he had a store on the side of the road. But it wasn't just any store. It was a gas station, a dry cleaners, a shoe shine place, a grocery store. And it had, in the fact of, how they had the shop owner and the place upstairs where you live, it wasn't big enough for all that. It was about big as this. And then, so to me, it was like his dorm room was behind the shop, was like where his bed was, and that's where he lived, in the shop. And when we went to visit, and we called him Daddy Creek, we have lots of pet names,
yes,
Big Mama, Granny,
know.
Daddy Creek. When we went to visit Daddy Creek, so since he had 10 children and about 50 plus grandchildren, we were on a ration plan. You could get like 1 cookie, 1 piece of bologna, 1 cracker, and 1 drink, and 1 piece of candy.
But you got much more than that.
Of course.
You got, the understanding
I
of
got
what
the
it
name,
was
I
to
got
be an
the
entrepreneur.
work ethic. I got the work ethic, and I got the love of the freedom to utilize your intellect, your ingenuity, and your creativity to create economic access, economic success, because that's really what it's all about. Even coming back to Michigan Street, yes, it's a nonprofit organization, but if we don't get the grants, if we don't have sustainable events, concerts, history talks, the museums themselves, then it will go down. So
that's a
the economics, the nonprofit doesn't mean no financial activity by a long shot. So here I am getting known for grants and so forth and so on, but also being an entrepreneur. I'm just a get the job done thing, whether it's church, Delta, whatever it is. So it was Stephanie Barber Jeter that came to me and said, Karen, we have a project that needs this type of startup, because that's really what both of these projects have been. There was no such thing as Michigan Street Corridor before 2007. Now in 2000, with all credit to, we stand on the shoulders, there's nothing
Yes,
new
right.
under the sun. George Arthur had led a group including George Scott, Bishop Henderson, Bishop Montgomery, and that group, at that time, the goal was to get an urban renewal area in that area around Michigan and Broadway. And so their focus really was on that corner that I spoke of. But then in 2008, largely with the leadership really of Assemblywoman Crystal Peoples-Stokes, who put the legislation into effect, and then State Senator Antoine Thompson, because it had to be passed on the Senate side as well. That's how the heritage area got set up.
I
So
see.
that was 10 years ago. We spent 2 years just doing a lot of community meetings, visioning, what are we going to do, what are we going to be, and we got a little bit of money, enough to hire a world-class consultant to help us with our management plan, which passed on the first run to the state. It became the heritage area. So, fast forward, then finally you get a few grants to do this and a few grants to do that. And altogether, I think I've added up that it was about 600 to 700,000 that between the Assemblywoman, as they say, the tree shakers and the jelly makers. She was shaking the trees and finding the money and letting me know where those grants were. And then I would have to go and tell the story and write the grant, and in some cases go visit, have interviews, advocate, and so forth and so on.
What you've illustrated in this short time is how much work it takes, how hard it is. Without even going into the detail,
startup.
I think that our viewers can understand that this doesn't, one, you said it doesn't come overnight. Persistence is needed, but also just continuing to go back to the well.
Right.
I'm running out of time.
Yeah, thank you for noticing. We didn't get to talk about rock. I have to come back.
So very often, that's what I tell my guests. You need to come back because we don't have enough time to get to everything. So I hope you plan to come back.
There are both stories to tell. I absolutely will.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Humboldt Parkway.
Here we are at the end of our program, folks. This has been They've Got Stories to Tell, Conversations with Uncrowned Community Builders, a program of the Uncrowned Queens Institute. We invite and encourage you to visit our website, www.uncrownedcommunitybuilders.com, to learn more about the lives and contributions of the uncrowned queens and kings we are spotlighting in this program. You can also watch this program on the YouTube UCB channel at www.youtube.com/uncrownedqueens. I want to have a special thanks to James R. Heck III, the Romeos, Retired Old Men Eating Out, and Roger and Betsy Struther for their generous support of this program. Look forward to seeing you next week on this very same station. Thank you.